Welcome to Something to Wrestle With. Bruce Prichard. Well, you know. That's not a rib.
Well, eventually, Russo would write that little by little, he was given more opportunities. He says the first real breakout opportunity is when McMahon asked him to start writing some of the promos that the boys would do to help sell tickets for upcoming house shows. He says, I more or less became the voice of many WWF superstars, from the Smoking Guns to Bret Hart to Kevin Nash. Some of the guys used my stuff, others didn't, but it was a great learning process. From there, under the tutelage of the great Jack Lanza, a former WWF superstar, I began to produce the boys as well. I can remember spending hour upon hour helping Sean Waltman, aka X-Pac, with his promos. Later, Sean would finally hit his stride, but in those days, ouch. Who do you remember Russo working with, and how do you think he did at this when he was first kind of getting his feet wet in this aspect of the business?
When we first threw him into just trying to write the promos and everything, it was during the Sal Sincere and T.L. Hopper and all that.
The Goon,
during that
Freddie
time,
Joe Floyd, yeah.
And help out with some of those vignettes and say, okay, you're a writer, here, write some stuff. And while at TV, he didn't have a whole lot to do at TV. So he's a writer. Let him write something for some of the talent that are not that good with the gift of gab. So as you mentioned, some of the Smoking Guns and X-Pac and, like Sal Sincere and people like that, just had him work with. And Jack Lanza produced the pre-tapes and produced the event center bits with the guys where they were promoting the towns locally, and had Russo write some things for them. If they couldn't come up with them themselves, try and write something creative for them around their character.
So Russo obviously writes very glowingly here about Blackjack and how fond he was of working with Lanza, just how much he learned and all that. Does McMahon pair them together to sort of have an old timer coach up a young Russo as far as the ins and outs of working with the boys? Because it feels like Russo would have maybe a lot of, upside in writing, but maybe he didn't understand the weird dynamic of the way you have to kind of handle the boys sometimes. And it feels like you need an old timer to kind of hold your hand through that process. Is that fair to say?
Well, Jack was the producer of those interviews. So Jack was the guy, and it was just simply Jack was that person in that position at that time. So he was more or less the buffer when the guy said, what the hell is this, for Jack to say, do it.
That's what I mean. I feel like if Russo just came in and said, okay, bro, here's what I want you to do, and there's not somebody that they have a lot of experience with and respect for and know that they can't try to, bow up on, then it may have been a situation where nobody's giving Russo the time of day. You need kind of Lanza to lend his credibility in this situation amongst the boys.
Exactly. Twist their arm.
And that's not a knock on Russo. It's just, if I was backstage in WWE tomorrow and I'm handing people notes on what to do in their promo, people are going to raise an eyebrow. I mean, I'm not in the business. What the hell do I know?
Any newcomer.
Yeah, exactly. Russo wrote in his book that he grew very close with Lanza, and he says, I was a sponge around him. I wanted to learn everything from Jack. The guy had been a legend in his day, and I was thrilled to have the opportunity to work under him. As time went on, I would begin to tell Jack about my frustration in the company, and he felt like he could do more. Lanza told him to just be patient and to keep doing what you're doing. Quote, man, I love the guy. We grew extremely close. So close, in fact, that years later, when I flew down to Atlanta to interview with WCW, I called Jack from my hotel room to let him know what I was doing. Under circumstances we will get into later, Jack knew I was unhappy, and he told me I had to do what was right for me. Now here's the sickening part of the wrestling business, the part that I loathe, the reason why I'm writing this book from the back of my own store and no longer a part of an industry that is very hard to get out of my blood. To make a long story short, I took the job at WCW and I called Jack to thank him for everything. I got his voicemail, so I punched in my phone number and left it. After 15 minutes, Jack called back and Amy answered the phone. This is Jack Lanza. Did somebody page me from that number? Jack said. Amy was pleasant to Jack because she knew I always ranted and raved about him. And Amy said, hi, Jack, this is Amy Russo. Then Jack Lanza hung up the phone. Now, obviously, I was thinking Jack was probably on his cell phone or maybe in a car with a bunch of the guys, and he knew he couldn't talk to me at that time. So a few days later, I called his house. I explained to his wife what had happened, and I said to her, I just hope Jack isn't not taking my calls because I'm with WCW now. Oh no, Jack isn't like that, Jack's wife said. I never heard from Jack Lanza ever again. That's what's tough about this business. There are no friends. Can you speak why this is? You know, Bruce, we've talked about this before, and I've heard you say that when you leave the WWF, McMahon and company basically tell everyone not to speak to you. What's their thinking in doing this? Why do they do that?
I just think it's a weird dynamic, and it's a weird vibe. But I think people felt betrayed when Russo left the way that he left. And old timers, man, when you turn your back on somebody, they're done with you.
Russo wrote in his book, contrary to popular misconception, I love spending time with the old timers, the insights, the stories. It was an education. And he specifically puts over George the Animal Steel, Bob Backlund, and Dutch Mantell. And he says that some of the stuff he did with Bob Backlund, he thought was the best work he ever did. And I have to say, reading this kind of shocks me, Bruce. On the one hand, you know, Russo's talking about how much he loved these legends and learning from them. But on the other hand, we know he believes a guy like Jim Cornette has antiquated ideas. Your thoughts?
Again, he speaks out of both sides of his mouth, so it's hard to tell exactly what the hell he means. I think that there's so much to learn from those that were there before us that if you're not learning something, then something's wrong. But then to, you know, go and call it antiquated and crazy and delusional is crazy in and of itself as well.